The world is bathed in red, and everything the hero sees is crimson, a place where death reigns. The character questions the necessity of all this violence. Memories overwhelm him. His friends, Sahyung, Jangmun, Sei, and Sajals, all lie lifeless. A deadly clash involving 20 different sects, including the 10 great sects, and the ultimate elite unit with the heavenly demon sect, has led to this total destruction, and one man is responsible, the leader of the heavenly demon sect, Chunma the heavenly demon. Chunma's voice echoes across the crimson battlefield as he talks to the sole survivor from Manhwa sect. He speaks of the unfortunate fate that has befallen the young warrior, who could have claimed victory if he had survived. Yet, Chunma knows their journey is over. He praises the protagonist's swordsmanship, acknowledging the Manhwa sect's skill as the world's best. The protagonist, with one arm left, charges at Chunma, shouting for him to stop. But Chunma continues speaking, expressing his disappointment at running out of time. He warns that the battle is not the end, and the demons will return, conquering the world. As he beheads Chunma, the protagonist ponders the war's end and the approaching death. He worries about the fate of the Manhwa sect, now left with only powerless children after losing all its members and followers. The hero questions the meaning of the bloodshed caused by the Manhwa sect and regrets not dedicating more to training, wondering if it could have saved lives. As he falls on a pile of corpses, he reflects on life's fleeting nature, comparing it to a plum blossom that must eventually wither. He is Chung Myung, the plum blossom sword saint of the great Manhwa sect. After defeating the world's chaos-causing Chunma, he takes his last breath at the heavenly demon sect's headquarters mountain, leaving behind a lasting legacy. An abandoned child becomes a Manhwa sect disciple, growing up alongside peers. When a senior disciple names him Chung Myung, he feels his life flashing before him. The senior disciple emphasizes ethics over power, but Chung Myung tires of these lectures. Despite his talents, he's a sect rookie, acknowledging his achievements stem from the Manhwa sect's teachings. Sahyung Jangmun, his mentor, appears and asks if he regrets his past. Chung Myung honestly admits regret, wishing for more dedication to change the story's tragic end. Sahyung reassures him, saying the Manhwa sect will endure regardless of regrets. Chung Myung is struck in the head and initially thinks it's Chunma, but realizes that's impossible since he defeated Chunma. He opens his eyes and sees a young beggar with a bamboo stick. The beggar mentions Chunma, then insults Chung Myung, demanding he beg like others. Confused, Chung Myung tries to reason with the beggar, but the beggar laughs. Despite being a respected plum blossom sword saint, Chung Myung is threatened and insulted by a child. The beggar attacks with the bamboo stick, warning of death. During the attack, Chung Myung realizes his hand has become too short to defend effectively. He's defenseless, and the beggar continues to lash out, demanding understanding. Another beggar enters, witnesses the beating, and leaves silently. The room is filled with Chung Myung's desperate pleas for mercy. After the beating, Chung Myung sits by a lake, clearing blood from his nose. He reflects on never being beaten this badly, even at the Manhwa sect. Furious, he decides to deal with the beggars' union for the child's sake. Gazing at his reflection in the water, Chung Myung ponders his identity. He contemplates the possibility of reincarnation, considering Shaolin Temple over Manhwa if he had known about it. The beggar who left earlier reappears and addresses Chung Myung. Chung Myung recognizes him and asks if he fled during the beating. The beggar shares that the young beggar Wang Cho, who beat Chung Myung, tends to be harsh but went overboard today. Chung Myung wants to ask a question, first raising one finger and then two. Chung Myung and the beggar exchange confused looks. Chung Myung asks, "Am I a beggar?" The young beggar confirms it due to Chung Myung's attire. Frustrated, Chung Myung refuses to accept being a beggar. He then asks his second question, inquiring about Chunma. The young beggar comments on Chung Myung's strange behavior and eventually confirms that Chunma died a century ago. Shocked, Chung Myung repeats the revelation and grabs the beggar's shirt, demanding the truth. The beggar assures him there's no benefit to lying, and Chung Myung releases his grip. Chung Myung is shocked to learn 100 years have passed since he defeated Chunma. Frustration bubbles up as he wishes he could have been sent back to a time right after his victory. He feels abandoned in a world that moved on without him. The young beggar notices Chung Myung's distress but gets no response. Chung Myung thinks of the Manhwa sect and wonders how time has affected them. He asks the young beggar about the sect, but the beggar is confused, not knowing what it is. Chung Myung then inquires if the young beggar is a beggar, which the beggar confirms. Assuming the beggar, part of the beggars' union, knows of the Manhwa sect, he's shocked when the beggar doesn't recognize it, even though it was one of the 10 great sects, like the beggars' union. The beggar looks at Chung Mayang with a questioning expression and replies, asking him what nonsense he's spouting. He then lists out the 10 great sects, including the Shaolin Temple, the Wudang, Ashen Sect, Kongtong Sect, Qingcheng Sect, the Lotus Order, Southern Island Sect, Kunlun Sect, the Beggars Union, and the Southern Edge Sect. He states that there is no such thing as the Mount Hua sect in the 10 great sects. Chung Mayang is baffled and grabs the beggar, shaken by the news that the Mount Hua sect isn't among the 10 great sects. Chung Mayang demands more information about the Mount Hua sect, and the beggar vaguely recalls it being on a Shaanxi province map. Chung Mayang's interest is piqued, and he presses for more details. The beggar mentions that while unsure if the Mount Hua sect was one of the 10 great sects, it has already fallen. This revelation shocks Chung Mayang, unable to believe that such a prominent sect has collapsed. Releasing the young beggar, Chung Mayang resolves to see the situation at Mount Hua himself. The beggar advises against it, but Chung Mayang insists and continues his questioning. Chung Mayang asks the beggar to identify him by name, and after some hesitation, the beggar says his name is Cho Sam. Chung Mayang inquires about the beggar's age, but the beggar has no specific answer, so Chung Mayang estimates it to be around 15 or 16 based on his appearance. Chung Mayang continues questioning, asking for the beggar's name and the name of the one who beat him. The beggar, Ku7, gives his name, and the assailant was Ku8, also known as Wang Cho. Chung Mayang declares his intention to repay favors twofold and grudges tenfold, urging Ku7 to remember his name and the Mount Hua sect. He starts to leave but quickly returns to ask for directions to Mount Hua in the Shaanxi province, and Ku7 reluctantly provides the information. Chung Mayang sets off on foot, contemplating the challenge of traveling without transportation. Despite exhaustion and physical strain, he pushes forward, reflecting on his slow horse rides in his past life and persevering. As he stumbles and falls, Chung Mayang worries about the daunting journey ahead. He realizes his body isn't fit for such exertion and contemplates the possibility of passing out or even dying on the way. Then, a determined smile appears on Chung Mayang's face. He sees an opportunity to train in martial arts, channeling his cunning and trickery. With newfound excitement, he knows he can make the most of this chance. Chung Mayang reflects on the regrets of even the most accomplished martial artists, realizing the importance of fundamentals and discipline. He fondly recalls the taste of alcohol hidden by his Sahyung. Determined to disconnect from the physical world, he sits beneath a tree, pondering his next steps. With a wealth of knowledge in his head about advanced martial arts and inner Kai cultivation, he decides to begin with the basic technique called equilibrium. Despite it being widely available, equilibrium doesn't significantly boost inner Kai strength but serves to purify the body. Understanding the need to establish a strong foundation for inner strength, Chung Mayang believes that perfecting equilibrium is the first step. He recognizes the importance of precisely cleansing impure energy absorbed from the environment and gathering it into his danchan to become a formidable martial artist, akin to repairing a fabric strand by strand. After completing his equilibrium training, Chung Mayang feels a surge of happiness. He believes that the danchan he developed will be the foundation for a new world of power, growing like a snowball into an unstoppable force. As he contemplates heading to Mount Hua to test his newfound skills, he suddenly collapses. Realizing he's depleted his energy learning equilibrium, he curses his misfortune. His Sahyung's image appears and offers advice, but Chung Mayang brushes him off. Frustrated and desperate, he shouts, wondering how he'll reach Mount Hua in this condition. In a village, a young beggar rushes to report to an older man. The rookie beggar is intercepting their begging money, described as a petty-looking kid to whom everyone donates their coins. The older beggar decides they need to teach the rookie beggar a lesson and points out Chung Mayang as the culprit. He shouts at Chung Mayang, who doesn't react and continues eating. The older beggar becomes more agitated, calling Chung Mayang a brat and questioning if he's deaf. Chung Mayang nonchalantly asks if they're talking about him, further infuriating the older beggar, who accuses him of speaking informally and losing his mind at a young age. The older beggar warns Chung Mayang that he must leave and give up his belongings. Chung Mayang confronts them, calling them shameless for taking his food, which angers the younger beggar who calls him a brat. Chung Mayang gets up, stretches, and tests his strength with a few punches. He mentions that his danchan isn't perfect yet but is sufficient for now. He taunts the beggars, saying he won't hit them too hard, but they can attack him together. The older beggar orders the two younger beggars to attack Chung Mayang. As they charge, he effortlessly dodges the young beggar's punch and counterattacks, sending the young beggar flying. Chung Myung asserts his identity as the Plum Blossom Sword Saint of the Great Mount Hua sect and fights back against the 3 beggars, defeating them. The beggars sit on their knees, covered in bruises, and the older beggar apologizes, addressing Chung Myung as chief. Confused, Chung Myung questions why they call him that and gets upset when the beggar suggests chief beggar. The older beggar bows and apologizes once more. Chung Myung then asks if they know the quickest way to Shaanxi province. The older beggar laughs, and Chung Myung realizes they might not have useful information. Chung Myung starts smiling and laughing, then suddenly grabs the older beggar's shirt, warning him to be prepared if they meet again. He instructs them to leave if they understand, and they hastily run off, expressing their understanding. In a picturesque valley surrounded by mountains and blooming plum blossoms, an elderly man gazes out the window. He is addressed as sect leader by a voice from outside. The sect leader warmly welcomes Unum and inquires about a child who wishes to meet him. Unum mentions it's not something significant but a child's request. Chung Myung stands outside, raising his hands in greeting. He respectfully introduces himself and expresses his desire to join the Mount Hua sect. The sect leader asks Unum if he informed Chung Myung that they are not accepting new members, and Unum confirms this but notes Chung Myung's desperation. Chung Myung, while appearing to smile, is internally irritated. Moments ago, he arrived at Mount Hua, recalling the beggar's shortcut advice, which didn't help much. Despite the challenge, he was determined to reach Mount Hua and vowed to confront the beggars if he saw them again. He started climbing the stairs with a stick in hand, panting heavily. With a resolute mindset, he climbed as if his life depended on it. While ascending, a rock he held onto fell, but he managed to maintain his balance. He continued climbing, believing in the power of tenacity and vowing to reach the mountaintop. Upon arrival, he stood panting, shocked to find the Mount Hua sect signboard missing. Frustrated and nostalgic, he shouted in disbelief, wondering where it had gone. The sect door opens, and someone inquires about Chung Myung's presence. Unum realizes it's just a kid and asks how he managed to come all the way up alone. Chung Myung, panting from the climb, doesn't answer. He clears his throat and asks if Unum practices martial arts from the Mount Hua sect. Unum confirms his affiliation with the Mount Hua sect, making Chung Myung happy that it hasn't vanished completely. However, Unum explains that they aren't accepting outsiders. It's too late for Chung Myung to descend because of the cold night on Mount Hua, so Unum invites him inside. Entering the sect, Chung Myung is surprised. The training grounds have a dirt floor, and he wonders why they didn't use marble stones. Unum notices his expression and asks what's wrong. Chung Myung forces a smile and praises the spacious training ground. As they walk further, Chung Myung discovers an entire building missing, shocking him. He can't believe the heavenly golden palace is gone. He points it out to Unum, who acknowledges the emptiness and mentions the palaces that used to stand there. Chung Myung wonders where they've gone, but Unum says it's not something someone of his age would know. He explains it's a wound to the glory of some sort. Chung Myung mutters, "Glory, my ass," and when Unum asks, he dismisses it as nothing. Unum leads Chung Myung silently. As they walk, Chung Myung sympathizes with the Mount Hua sect's decision to sell the heavenly golden palace, understanding the challenges they faced. They arrive at the Yuyuan temple, which seems well preserved. Unum explains that guests have responsibilities, including paying respects to ancestors, preparing Chung Myung for the ritual. Chung Myung enters the room, his face puzzled as he surveys the missing artifacts. The golden candlestick, the handwritten scroll by ancestor Didong Hak, gold plating decorations, and paintings have all vanished. His confusion deepens when he realizes a particular flower is missing. In a sudden outburst, he exclaims about the missing flower, leaving Unum perplexed. Unum questions what flower he means, to which Chung Myung clarifies there should be a flower in the room and asks where it's gone. Unum, after some thought, recalls a white metal plum blossom that used to be in the room. Chung Myung's eyes brighten with recognition, and he urgently inquires about its whereabouts. Unum reluctantly admits they sold the flower because it didn't fit the temple's decor, but they found a willing merchant who paid a good price for it. Chung Myung is struck by shock and despair, falling to his knees. He reflects on the unfortunate fate of the Mount Hua sect, losing their sacred artifacts, particularly the white plum blossom of the nocturnal fragrance, and the divine sword of the violet dawn. He regards the white plum blossom as a sacred artifact that encapsulated the sect's righteous spirit. Overwhelmed with disappointment, Chung Myung knows he must intervene to prevent further mistakes by the sect. With a humble bow, Chung Myung earnestly requests a meeting with the sect leader and the opportunity to join the Mount Hua sect. In the present, the sect leader gazes at Chung Myung with curiosity, questioning his knowledge of the Mount Hua sect in light of his desire to join. Chung Mayong reaffirms his understanding of the sect and his strong aspiration to become a member. The sect leader contemplates this request, aware of its challenges. As the sect leader ponders, Chung Mayong devises a plan. He assumes the identity of Chung Jin, a figure lost in war. Chung Mayong weaves a tale in which Chung Jin survived a fall from a cliff, aided by a compassionate lumberjack who became his disciple after learning the sect's martial arts. He then discloses that he is the descendant of that very lumberjack. Chung Mayong's face radiates a smile as he envisions this narrative, solidifying his place within the sect. As the lumberjack's grandson, he would technically share a status with the sect leader, an impressive scenario granting him higher standing than the younger members. Eagerly, he awaits the sect leader's response, prepared for any potential rejections or queries. Chung Mayong is baffled by the unexpected approval from the sect leader to join the sect. He looks at the sect leader, bewildered by the turn of events. Unum reminds the sect leader of his earlier statement about not accepting new members, further surprising him. However, the sect leader experiences a change of heart, feeling it might be their destiny to admit Chung Mayong. This fortunate turn of events leaves Chung Mayong incredulous, thinking the sect leader should have been more cautious with newcomers. The sect leader explains his philosophy, likening their acceptance of Chung Mayong to offering shelter to birds and food to hungry animals in winter. They cannot deny a child earnestly seeking entry into the sect. The sect leader instructs Unum to provide Chung Mayong with accommodation and prepare for the entrance ceremony. Unum agrees and pledges to make the necessary arrangements. Chung Mayong's scheme has backfired, relegating him to a lower status instead of being on par with the sect leader. He feels disappointed that his plan didn't unfold as intended. Chung Mayong dons his new disciple uniform and sighs with self-disappointment for wearing a third-rank disciple's attire. He surveys the room, recalling it as a guest room. Peering out the door, he finds it peculiar that it's a temporary lodging for future sect members. He remembers that the Mount Hua sect typically lacked private quarters, and new members would immediately bond with their instructors, residing in their rooms. Curiosity led Chung Mayong outside his room, where he peeked into a nearby chamber. To his surprise, he discovered that these rooms were occupied. Startled by a voice behind him, Chung Mayong turned to find a fellow disciple in Mount Hua sect attire, who accused him of being a thief. The disturbance stirred other dormitory residents from their rooms, prompting discussions about the situation. Questions were raised about what was happening, and concerns were expressed for Gul's well-being, the disciple who had confronted Chung Mayong. Chung Mayong couldn't help but sigh inwardly, reflecting on his penchant for attracting trouble. A stern voice soon intervened, belonging to Great Sasak Ungum, the head of the boarding house, who demanded silence. Ungum entered the room and rebuked the disciples for causing a disturbance during training time. The disciples promptly apologized, and Ungum then turned his attention to Chung Mayong, inquiring about his name. Chung Mayong introduced himself, and Ungum identified him as the new resident of the White Plum Blossom boarding house. Ungum instructed Chung Mayong to rest for the remainder of the day, and join the training scheduled for the next day. The other disciples were directed to leave and return downstairs as they were told. However, Gul, with a menacing warning, hinted at a future confrontation with Chung Mayong. After Gul's departure, Chung Mayong stood alone with a blank expression, contemplating the young disciples of the Mount Hua sect. He vowed to provide them with proper guidance, even if his methods differed from the norm. After their training session, Gul approaches Chung Mayong and makes a peculiar request for him to take off his clothes, suggesting it as a way for men to bond and strengthen their affection for their Sahyungs. Chung Mayong, puzzled, inquires about the boarding house advisor, Ungum, but Gul informs him that Ungum doesn't train in the afternoon. Gul's chatty nature leads to a change of plans, and he proposes a minor beating instead. Unexpectedly, Chung Mayong asks Gul to flex his neck muscles, and before Gul can respond, Chung Mayong's powerful punch lands on his mouth, creating a hole in the roof of the boarding house. The shocked disciples witness this act in astonishment, moved to tears by the consequences of Gul's brash behavior. Later, the disciples line up and bow to Chung Mayong. He orders Sahyung Yoonjong to massage his shoulders, giving him special treatment as the great Sahyung. Yoonjong complies with respect. Chung Mayong then addresses Gul, who is bowing before him. Despite Gul's fear, Chung Mayong reassures him and seeks answers about the heavenly golden palace and the turmoil within the Mount Hua sect. In response, Gul hesitates before raising the question of whether Chung Mayong knows about the Plum Blossom Sword Saint. Chung Mayong admits he knows about the Plum Blossom Sword Saint and wonders if he might be that very figure. The Sasuks reveal the role of the Plum Blossom Sword Saint in defeating Chunmo, which led to the Heavenly Demon sect's retaliation and the burning of Mount Hua, resulting in the sect's decline. Chung Mayang regrets realizing that he may be responsible for the sect's fall. Later, at a small table, Jang Mun and Chung Mayang discuss removing the Taoistic Tei Flummox sword technique from the sect's teachings and library. Jang Mun suggests that Chung Mayang take in disciples, but Chung Mayang humorously suggests starting by beating them up, which leads to the topic being dropped. Yoon Jong informs Chung Mayang that Ungum has summoned him to the Sam training grounds, where he'll join the training. All the disciples, armed with blades, follow Sahyang's instructions. Chung Mayang, alongside Unem, watches the training but questions the equilibrium sword technique being practiced, believing it may hinder the children's progress rather than making them stronger. Chung Mayang finds the equilibrium sword technique too complex for beginners and believes it's like teaching the alphabet using a complex thesis book. He approaches the training area, contemplating the situation and feeling that without proper fundamentals, the technique is of little use to the disciples. He suggests that if they practice this technique, it should be taught correctly. Gazing at the vast blue sky, he compares it to the uncertain future of the Manhwa sect. Chung Mayang questions a disciple about their training curriculum apart from the equilibrium sword technique. The disciple explains they will progress to the sword technique of the 7 sages and eventually the Tei Flummox sword technique after mastering the equilibrium sword technique. Chung Mayang is dumbfounded when he hears about the Tei Flummox sword technique, recalling Sahyang Young Mun's words. He is frustrated and confused, unable to understand why they are learning the technique they had agreed to discard. Wondering what happened to the 24-movement Plum Blossom sword technique they were supposed to be learning instead. A Sahyang interrupts Chung Mayang's thoughts, demanding to know who was speaking. In the Plum Blossom boarding house, Chung Mayang asks Gul for a favor, who eagerly agrees. Chung Mayang instructs Gul to gather everyone in front of the White Plum Blossom boarding house at 5 a.m. the next morning and prepare 5 of those per person. Gul is surprised by the request but agrees nervously. As Chung Mayang watches Gul leave, he reflects on the state of the Manhwa sect, knowing it lacks wealth, technique, and talent. Despite the current disciples not appearing very talented, Chung Mayang sees bringing them up as the first step in rebuilding the sect, recalling the saying that a 1,000-mile journey starts with a single step. At 5 a.m., the disciples gather outside the White Plum Blossom boarding house, complaining about the Sei who made them assemble. One disciple looks to Gul and Yoon Jong for agreement. Chung Mayang suddenly appears and inquires if he's the Sei they were talking about. The complaining disciple confirms this and criticizes Chung Mayang's lack of respect for his seniors. Chung Mayang's expression shifts, but he then smiles and apologizes for not understanding his Sahyangs. He invites the complainer inside the boarding house for a chat, and all the disciples follow. Shortly after entering, the building begins to shake, and those outside watch in amazement. Inside, Chung Mayang expresses satisfaction at their response but asks for quiet to avoid waking the great Sasuk. He introduces himself and announces that they will train together every morning at the same time. Ungum wakes up to find no morning greetings and assumes the White Plum Blossom boarding house residents are still asleep after the newcomers' unusual welcome. He plans to teach them a lesson and heads there, expecting Jo Gul to have things under control. However, he's surprised to find disciples in poor condition, unable to stand or catching their breath. Ungum questions the situation, but the disciples remain silent. His attention shifts to Jo Gul, who also looks worse for wear. Ungum then notices Chung Mayang, who is doing squats with heavy weights, counting to 10,085.